Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Yard Care class. My name is Megan Festuca, and I am an environmental specialist with the town of North Hempstead. I would like to also introduce Bonnie Klein, who will also be teaching the class with me, and she is the town's horticulturist. We'll be jointly giving this class, and we really want to thank everyone for joining us today. So before we start, I just want to remind everyone that you are muted. So if you have any questions for us during the presentation, you can type them at any time into the chat box. If you don't know where the chat box is, usually if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a little menu and it says chat. So you just click on that and then there'll be a little bar that comes up on the side that you can type the questions into. So you can send your questions just to the panelists, which is Bonnie and myself, or you could send it to everyone so that the rest of the attendees can see your questions as well. And then we will pause at intervals during the presentation to answer any of them. So we might not be able to answer them right away, so just wait until we pause and then we can answer your questions. Okay, so let's jump right in and get started. There are many goals to sustainable yard care. There is some of them we'll go over in more detail, but mostly it's to reduce or eliminate inputs like water, chemicals, and maintenance practices, to help benefit wildlife, to promote ecosystem services so that your yard helps the environment and the ecosystem at large, and not just, standalone yard. And then also, of course, to provide human benefits. So we want a yard that's beautiful and healthy for us to enjoy. So when we look at protecting water resources, one of the main things we have to think about is our groundwater. If you didn't know, Long Island gets all of its potable water, which includes drinking water, from underground aquifers. And you can see this picture right here. I hope everyone can see my pointer. Bonnie, if you want to let me know, make sure everybody can see it. You there, Bonnie? If you unmute yourself. Oh, okay, yes. Bonnie's telling me in the chat that yes, we can see it. Okay, good. So as you can see, we have many different aquifers right under where we live, right under the ground. So anything on top of it, our houses, our development, it's all right over the aquifer where we get our drinking water and all of our potable water. So especially during times like we're having now, where it's very hot and dry, during the summer months, we often overpump this water because it needs to be pumped out. And that puts a strain on the aquifer, and it also puts any pollutants that can go into the aquifer, which basically can be anything from fertilizers to oil from cars, anything that can go underground. That can go deeper and deeper into the aquifer. And we are already on Long Island having to pump deeper and deeper into our aquifer to get clean water out of it, because some of the top layers have been polluted too much. Surface water pollution is also a big problem on Long Island. We are surrounded by water, and one of the big problems is from storm water. So any water that's coming from our roofs, our streets, our lawns can transport pesticides, fertilizers, and anything else into our storm drains, which a lot of people think are filtered, but they're not. They just go straight into our local bays and estuaries. And as I said before, a lot of these pollutants can seep into the ground as well and make it into the underground aquifers. And on Long Island, we have many local water bodies that are plagued by nitrogen pollution. And that a lot of that comes from fertilizers, and this can cause algal blooms, which eventually cause dead zones in the water and can kill fish and other creatures in the sea. So it's not good. So another goal is to help wildlife. Much of the original habitat for wildlife has been lost to development, and most of the vegetated areas we have now do not support native wildlife. If you just look at most people's yards, they have, plants from Asia and Europe, and the wildlife we have here, unless it's, not native, is from America. So they depend on plants they've evolved with. which are from America. So when we have these other plants, they don't really support what the local wildlife needs. Also, the use of chemicals like insecticides can hurt pollinator populations, as well as other beneficial predatory insects. Insecticides also kill insects that are food for most birds and other wildlife, like this garter snake that's actually in my yard. And I know maybe people are scared of snakes, but these are relatively harmless and they provide a great service by eating lots of insects that are in your yard. Also, herbicides that people use may cause negative effects for insects and other wildlife, as well as kill the plants and things like host plants for butterflies and moths, like the monarch. This is this host plant of milkweed, and we'll talk a lot more about them later on in the presentation. The goal of human benefits. We can definitely have a beautiful yard as well as it being sustainable. You don't have to use all kinds of chemicals or anything to make it beautiful. And sustainable yards also help to reduce our own costs and maintenance. And then you definitely want to have a green space to help you be in nature, and being in nature and being outside has been shown to improve human health and well-being as well. So one of the main things of having a healthy, sustainable yard is starting with the soil. And it's important that we create a healthy soil ecosystem. So if we do have this healthy soil ecosystem, soils provide great services for us. They can absorb rainfall and mitigate flooding. They remove pollutants from stormwater, and that's important because they'll remove them before they get into our aquifers underground. They store water for plants, wildlife, and people that we use, and they provide habitat for plants and animals, while also storing carbon dioxide, which is important right now for helping to mitigate climate change. So one way we can help make our soils healthy is by composting. And composting is basically just, using the decomposition process for the human benefit. So in the soil, there are decomposing organisms like bacteria and fungi, and they break down all these materials that you put in your compost pile. And then what you get out of it is a great nutrient-rich amendment to your soil that you can put in and create that healthy soil ecosystem. Compost has many great benefits. As we said, that's usually what people use it for, is to provide nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus for your plants to grow well. But it also attracts earthworms and beneficial insects in the soil. It reduces waste that can end up in landfills, which is a really big thing, because most of Long Island's waste is carted off, at least in the town of North Hempstead, to landfills that are thousands of miles away. Sorry, more hundreds of miles. I think we put ours in upstate New York somewhere. It reduces and eliminates the use for fertilizers, because you have nitrogen and phosphorus coming from this compost to help your plants to grow. It can also improve soil texture, and it can regulate the pH of the soil. So that helps plants to have more of an ability to grow, because a lot of times plants can only take in nutrients at certain pHs. So you'll hear about certain plants that like more acidic soils or more basic soils or neutral soils, and that's, because they can't take up those nutrients in different types of soils. So composting systems, there are many, many different types. A lot of people choose to have bins, and usually those are for people who want to save space. Usually the town sells this compost bin. It's called the Tumbler. It's called the Soil Machine Pro. Unfortunately, we've had to cancel our sales for this year due to COVID. Hopefully next year we will have them again. But in the meantime, there's many other types of compost bins. You can even make one. So you can make something like this. It's basically a garbage can, and they just put lots of holes in it in the side and the top and the bottom to allow oxygen to get in. And then there's also, if you have a bigger space, you might want to do something like a pile like this. It can handle larger volumes of waste, although it may be harder to turn. And I have kind of a pile in my yard, and I use this tool. It's called a compost crank, and it makes it a lot easier to turn the compost. You basically just stick it into the compost pile, and then you twist it. That's why it's called the crank, and then you pull it up, and that helps to mix everything, so you don't have to go in there with a pitchfork or a shovel and kind of turn it over, which may be difficult. Then there's also bins like this, which are, you know, kind of a wooden crate that you put everything in. There's so many different types and versions of composting. There's lasagna layering composting. If you go into the New York City Master Composter Manual, and I have a link to it on the town sustainability page, that has a wealth of information on how to compost, different composting bins, and other ways to compost. So including worm composting and things like that. So if you're interested in getting more in depth with composting, that's a great resource. So let's talk a little bit about what to put in the compost. Basically, compost needs a balance of carbon and nitrogen-rich materials. Carbon-rich materials, as you can see here, are called browns, and then nitrogen-rich ones are called greens. So a good rule of thumb is to add 2 parts browns for every 1 part greens. And that just means if you have kitchen scraps and you're putting it in a container, and then you're putting that, you know, a little bucket or something, and you're putting that in your compost, then you want to put in 2 parts of the brown material so that it can have a good mix. And these are a lot of the different browns that you might have available. Dried leaves are usually a good one, especially in the fall, but there's also wood chips, eggshells, corn cobs, any kind of newspaper, usually with soy ink. You want to make sure you don't put any toxic ink in there, cardboard, any dry grass clippings, straw, things like that. And then you can see all the greens. And this picture is from the Master Composter Manual that I was telling you about, which is a great resource. So a lot of the greens we have are mostly going to be our vegetable peelings, any fresh garden trimmings, things like that, fresh grass. And if you have a horse or a rabbit and a guinea pig or chickens, you can also use that as a good source of greens, their manure. So some things that can happen if you add too many greens, you're going to have too much nitrogen. You may get an ammonia smell. It could become slimy. So you want to definitely add more browns to counteract this. And a lot of times compost isn't a science. You kind of just have to see, you know, how things look. Like if you do smell ammonia, then you'd be like, oh, okay, I'm adding too many greens. I need to add some browns. And then also if you add too many browns, then usually you have a compost pile that's going to be a little slow to get started. The temperatures won't get high enough, and decomposition will happen slowly. So you want to add more greens to this. We say not to add meat, fish, or dairy. These can cause insects to be attracted to them, different animals to be attracted to them. It causes it to smell a little bit. And if you have a small pile, like if you put this in some kind of industrial composting facility, it might be able to break it down, but in small piles or bins, these things are not going to break down because the temperatures won't get high enough. Colored paper, as I was saying before, sometimes it can have toxic ink, so you might not want to put that in there. But newspaper is usually okay with soy ink, so black and white inks. Pet waste, so these pets are okay, but do not put cat or dog waste. They can have pathogens in them, which you don't want to put into your soil. And then weeds. Weeds are weeds for a reason, so you don't want to put them in. They can, even if they're not seeding at the time, they can still go to seed in your compost, and then you're spreading weed seeds when you spread your compost. So one thing that you should do if you're just starting your compost bin or pile is to add some soil from your own yard. This is called inoculating it, which basically just means to add microbes that are already in your soil to get the process started. They do sell compost starters, but this is just an easy way and cheaper way that you can just add those microbes in to get things going. You should also break up the materials as much as you can. If you're lazy like me, I just throw whole things in there and it just takes slower to break down. But if you want your compost to break down and to get the compost faster, definitely break up everything as much as you can. This will increase their surface area so that the decomposers can break it down faster. Mixing it, turning it, that'll help add oxygen, which the decomposers need to break down everything. in the compost. You could also add something like bigger bulking agents, they call it. So you could add wood chips or pine cones or corn cobs, so that helps to circulate the oxygen, because these materials are larger in there. So it can take anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more to produce compost, depending on a lot of factors, like how small your materials are, what type of materials are being used. Like if you put a corn cob in there, it's going to take a long time to break down. If you put large materials, it's going to take longer to break down. Also, if it's winter, things are going to take longer because the temperature is not going to get warm and very warm, and also moisture content is important too. And then once it's done, you can work your compost into your soil. You could also top dress lawns or exposed soil. So if you have some established shrubs that you want to put it on, you can kind of put it on top of the soil right next to the base of the plant, and or you could try to work it in a little bit as well. Okay. So now we are going to pause for questions. So bear with me a moment, and I'm going to bring up the chat box to see if there's been any questions. I don't see anything. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box at any point during the presentation. And like I said, like now, we will pause. Oh, good, there's a question. Is it 2 brown to 1 green? Yes, 2. So if you have your bucket of scraps from the kitchen, you put 1 of those in, and then you put 2 buckets of similar size of brown materials, like leaves or something like that, dried leaves. Anything else? Any other questions before I hand it over to Bonnie to talk about sustainable lawn care? Okay, I don't see anything now, but like I said, if you have anything else, even if it's about the first part of the presentation, you're free to type it in at any time. Okay, so right now I am going to pass it over to Bonnie.
Hello, everybody. You can hear me, Megan?
Yes, I can hear you. You're good.
Excellent. Just testing. So good morning, everybody. We're going to move along and talk about lawn care. So I'm going to, since I don't have controls on my end, Megan's going to change the slides for me. So my name is Bonnie Klein. I'm the horticulturist for the town of North Hempstead. And I also, I'm based out of the Clark Botanic Garden. And I am the director of horticulture at the Clark Botanic Garden, which you're all welcome at any time to come visit. Our hours are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So I'd love for you to come visit. And then if you ask for me, and I'm usually around, I can answer questions that you have. So we're going to talk a little bit about lawn care. Lawn care and turf grass actually is a whole semester at some colleges. Farmingdale State College has a class. So we're really going to pack a lot of information into a very short time. Just a little history on lawns. The lawn is and has always been a status symbol. Lawns have their roots in English estates of the 16th century, where wealthy landowners planted turf grass for their cattle to graze on, and where they could play sports. So these lawns, they kept them meticulous, and they had staff hand cutting all of it. And it wasn't until the 1700s with the invention of a lawnmower that us middle class, lower class could have lawns and take care of it, in a different way, much easier for us. But that's where it started in England, and we sort of, the Americans wanted to sort of mimic what they had. It has its place. Of course, we use it for sports, and it does also the root system of the turf grass does net and help in erosion control in a lot of different areas. Okay, you can move forward. Next. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit how grass grows. Most of the grass that we're talking about are cool season grasses. There are warm season grasses that are grown in Florida and other parts of the country, and some zoysia that we can grow here, but most of the slides that we have here are we're talking about cool season grasses. So the cool season grasses grow best in the spring and the fall. As you can see on this chart, You can see the shoot growth just growing really tall in the spring, middle of the spring. And then, and the root growth also, when the tops match the bottoms. So the roots and the shoots match each other in the spring. And then when it starts to get hot in the summer, the roots die back and your growth of your shoots also die back. And all of this has to do with how we are going to time if we're going to use any inputs such as fertilizer or any kind of like lime. Again, in the fall, it grows, and because the weathers are cooling off. These are cool season grasses. That's when they like to grow. And then in the winter, they go dormant. So examples of these types of grasses are the Kentucky blue, the perennial rye, the fine, and the tall fescues, and those all do best in our area. Next, please. Okay, so a lot of you might not realize, but fertilizing healthy lawns in the early spring, most times the weather starts getting beautiful and everybody wants to see their lawns greening up and they're in a rush. But usually when you fertilize in early spring, you're just increasing the top growth, and then you have to mow more often, and then the roots aren't catching up. So you don't get a strong stand of grass. That lush growth, encouraged by the spring fertilizing, makes the grass more susceptible to all your insects and diseases. Your insects and diseases are mostly in the spring. So when you're pushing a lot of new growth and it's all lush and succulent, that's when all your insects and diseases are coming in. So it doesn't last into the summer, and that's when people start seeing a lot of different types of diseases. So if you look at this picture right here, it's showing late winter, early spring. The roots are nice and deep, but the tops are not yet growing because it's waiting for spring. Late spring, the tops start to grow. That's the lush growth, which is better if it's late spring instead of early spring. And then in the summer, it slows down. And then in the winter, it's going dormant. You really want the root system to take hold so it could withstand all of the different temperatures. Next. All right, so springtime, it might not be good to fertilize in early spring, but it's a very good time to seed and fertilize bare spots in the lawn. I'm not talking about a whole lawn of reseeding. We're just talking about fixing some bare spots that might have happened in the winter or in the fall before that spring. So in order to fix a bare spot, you would loosen the soil in that area because the seed has to make a connection to soil. You choose the seed, and we'll go over that in a minute about which seeds to choose. And what I do is, you see a bucket there, I mix the seeds in soil first and then put it onto the bare spot because it makes that connection. It's there already. Instead of the seed just laying out there and then birds or animals eating it, it's already mixed in. And you have to keep it moist. So you have to water it a couple of times a day. Not soak it, just moist. Next. Okay, so what seed should I buy? So depending upon your property, if you have a very sunny property, if you have a very shaded property, if the soil is dry, if you have sandy soil or you have a heavy clay soil, that always depends on what types of seed you should buy. So this mix, and if you want to copy this or take a screenshot of it, was taken from Cornell University as very good mixes depending upon what area you have. So the Kentucky blue, which most people love because of the color, it does get a lot of different diseases, and it also is high maintenance. So if you're looking for lower maintenance, then you would use more of the fescues and a little bit of ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass thrown into the mix, it grows faster, so it fills those bare spots quicker, and then it dies back, and then the other blends come in. It's always good to have a mix. When you're going to the store and you see the grass seed, you'll see these mixes in it. So if you come close to the percentages, then you know that that's a good a good one to buy. You don't want to just buy one that's all Kentucky blue or all fescues, because if it gets a disease or an insect, you're going to wipe out that area that you had reseeded. And shaded areas is a very big question. Everybody always asks me about shaded areas. The fine fescues, they're very thin. They're sort of rolled. They do very well in shaded areas. But again, because they're so thin, if you're running on them, they pull out faster. So they get damaged. If you just have a shaded area that nobody really walks on or plays any sports on, then the fine fescue blend is great. But if you're going to use it, then fine fescue is rough. You're going to have to reseed it often. Next. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Okay, here's a good question. Hold on one second. So question, what's good for clay soils? So depending upon your soil, so I have also clay soil, and I use a fescue blend. I like to mix just the fescues with the clay. The clay soils retain water, and so the fescues do well in that. I mean, if you have a little bit of bluegrass in it, that's fine too, just because of the color. And they sort of have hybrid fescues that look a little like bluegrass. It's hard to just make your own mix. When you go to the stores, they already have the blends there. You could buy maybe one bag of blue, one bag of fescue, and try to mix it yourself. But clay soils, you don't want to overwater because clay holds water. Hope I answered your question. So let's talk a little bit about fertilizer. I always think that it's way better to mulch mow if you mow it yourself, or if you have landscapers that mow for you, to ask them to mulch mow, which means putting the whatever was cut from the mower back onto your lawn. It does not cause any type of problem with the lawn. It just breaks down, and they say after 5 years of mulch mowing, you would never need to do added fertilizer, because again, fertilizer, this nitrogen is going through our watershed and causing all these issues, as Megan described earlier. So the least amount of fertilizer you could put on is great. But when you're first establishing a lawn, it's not going to grow unless you have some type of fertilizer. So when you're looking at these bags of fertilizer, they're all labeled with these 3 numbers. So it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And you want to look at those numbers, and the percentage means it represents 1 pound of product in that bag. So depending upon, like if you have 21% of nitrogen, you have a 50-pound bag, so 21% of the 50 pounds is nitrogen, and so forth. So you would see these numbers on all of the bags. Any questions on that? I know that I'm not getting really deep into the formulas because there's so many different types. Okay. So fertilization. On a healthy, well-established lawn, the recommendation for fertilizing home lawns on Long Island is 1 pound of nitrogen, not the product. That's what we were sort of saying in the slide before. 1 pound of nitrogen to be spread over 1,000 square feet at each fertilization time. So if you have a 50-pound bag, but it's 21% nitrogen, you don't want 1 pound of that bag. You have to just do your ratios and know that it's 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. You know, we were talking about when to do it. One application, Memorial Day. Memorial Day is May. So when a lot of people are doing it in early spring, that's going to be at the expense of the root system of the turf. So Memorial Day is great. Labor Day is great. And then again, there are laws that there's no fertilizer between November 15th and April 1st in Nassau County. Okay. Now, before you do anything, soil testing is number 1. A lot of times the pH level is off, and so your turf grass is not pulling up the fertilizer that you're using, and then it's just leaching into our watershed. So in order to know what your pH level is. There's a little test that you could purchase. It's sort of like a pool. You're testing your pH in your pool, or you could bring it to the Cornell Cooperative Extension in East Meadow. You bring your soil in and they can test it for you. I think there's a nominal fee there. But these soil tests monitor either the plant nutrient levels and or the pH level. I would go with pH testing first, because if that's off, you can easily correct that with lime. You have to identify that. So you can identify or measure insect population diseases, drainage issues, pesticides, and other chemical levels with some of these tests, that just knowing your pH or your nutrient level. We just don't want you to add things, inputs, without knowing what your pH level is or your nutrient level is. Yeah, you can move on. Thank you. Mowing. So mowing also has an effect on your lawn. Just mowing and not realizing that if your mower blade is dull, you increase water loss. You can increase your fuel loss. You increase opportunity for pets. A dull mower blade just opens up the leaves on the turf grass, and right away pests can set in, disease can set in, and you're just using more fuel and again more water loss. You're not, the turf grass is not retaining the water. So an easy fix if you're mowing your own lawn, or if you want to check with your landscaper if you can catch them before they move on to the next person, is to just know if you have a good mower blade. You can look at your grass, you pull a piece off, and if you see that the leaf blade is frayed, or if it's like orangey color, then you know that was caused by a dull mower blade. Next. So mowing heights. So this is one thing that we have at Clark. We have some of my staff like to cut the lawns very, very low. As soon as you're doing that, when you cut your grass really low, the roots die back. The roots mimic the tops. So now you're putting, if you're cutting it low, the roots automatically cut themselves off low, and now you're susceptible to heat stress, insects, disease, and so forth. So the best thing you can do for your turf is to try to maintain a 3-inch mowing height. Then your root system is at least 3 inches into the soil, and it's staying cool, and it's not going to crap out on you. So the key is if you have a 3-inch lawn, I usually recommend, well, it's very hard to do this, but Cornell says to have when it grows to 4 inches, you cut it back to 3 inches. That's doesn't really happen around here. You never see a lawn that's that tall. So if you have a 3-inch lawn, it grows to 3-inch, you don't cut more than 1 inch off. So avoid removing more than 1/3 of the grass blade length at any one mowing. And then that 1 inch goes back into your lawn, provides nitrogen for the lawn. Next. Watering your lawn. One of the biggest problems when I worked for the Cornell Cooperative Extension was people watering too often and not enough duration during that. So I'll read this first and then I'll explain. So don't water shallow and frequently on established turf. So that means every other day for 15 to 45 minutes. Don't water that often. Now, there was rules for Nassau County that if you have an odd number house or an even number house, you water on your odd or even number for control of water. But what that meant, what it didn't mean was for you to always water every other day. It meant that you can water every other day. I water maybe twice a week. If you water frequently every other day, then the root system stays close to the surface. And then when you have a heat wave like we've just been having, the roots are too close to the surface and they die. And then you see a lot of lawns looking all brown. So what it's saying on this slide, it creates shallow profile for the soil moisture, resulting in dry areas in the soil. And then it stimulates the weed seeds. That's when you're going to see a lot of weeds coming up, promotes disease, fungus, insect problems, and causes the surface to crust, moss and algae buildup in many shaded areas. So deep, infrequent watering in the first picture in that first box shows you a lush top with a nice root system. So you're watering deeply. So I water usually between 45 minutes and an hour. I probably go to an hour and a half. Now I'm only watering twice a week, but my root system is staying cool and staying deep, and it's not looking to the top to get its water. So that's what you want, that first box. The second one is the deep but frequent. So it means you're watering for like 45 minutes to an hour, but you're watering every day, every other day, and it's rotting the roots. So you're not getting a good root system. And then the last box is shallow watering, but you're watering often, which is sort of what most people do. They water every other day for half an hour, 15 minutes, and you're getting a shallow root system, which makes it susceptible lawn. So the first one is what you really want, deep and infrequent. Now, of course, when you're in a big heat wave like we're in, you can water a little more. So, you know, if you can water 3 times a week. I know it's rough because of the your watering. If you have an automatic sprinkler system, you're going to have to set that. So it might be a little rough, but the newer systems are easy to work out. Next, please. Okay, so best practice on watering lawns, 1 to 1.5 inches per week for established turf. And you can test how much your system, if you have an automatic system. I don't, I rip mine out because I like to be in control of my watering a little bit differently, but you can test how much by using a rain gauge, or you could use like a tuna fish can, or if you have a cat, you can use the cat food can, and you can put it out when the system's on. That's about 1 inch, 1.5 inches. When the system starts, if that fills up, then you know you're getting that much water. So you want to water deep and infrequent, and often most of the needed water will be supplied by rain. Now we're going to talk a little bit about weeds. So my definition, a weed is a plant growing in the wrong place. It always depends upon the person what they feel is a weed, not a weed. These dandelions could be beautiful to some, and it could be, oh my goodness, dandelions, we have to get rid of them. So the life cycle of a weed can determine how you might or might not want to control the weed. So knowing what weed you have and knowing a little bit about their life cycle, that's how you can control your weeds. Next. So preventive weed practices. So in order to prevent weeds, we're going to try to mow a little higher. Reducing compaction. Reducing compaction means you can core aerate your lawns to reduce compaction. Depends on your soil. If you have a heavy clay soil, like the last person who asked the question, you probably have a lot of compaction. So if you core aerate, it's a machine that pulls cores up to open up space, and the best time to do that is in the fall. That could help reduce compaction. You want to repair all your bare spots. The spring is the best time to repair bare spots. Second best time would be in the fall. And fall, I'm talking about the end of August. It still feels like summer to us, but it's a short fall period. And then use compost. Compost is fantastic top dressing for all lawns. I use it almost every year. I use that in my bare spots. I just throw compost down as a top dressing, and once it over the years it incorporates itself and it improves the soil, and it just has a lot of fertilizer in the compost, all the nutrients that you need. And then hand weeding. That's something we do at Clark every minute of the day. Next. So use the weeds as indicators, as I said before. If you have crabgrass, clover, pigweed, spurge, yarrow, yellow wood sorrel, goosegrass, then that's telling you that your soil is probably too dry. If you have nutsedge, creeping bentgrass, buttercup, stocks, plantains, soil is probably too wet or you have poor drainage. So if you identify your weed, which they could do that at the Cornell Cooperative Extension as well, or you can try to look it up and figure out what weed you have, and then you look up that weed, it'll give you the indicators as to what's going on in your soil. So identifying that weed first, part of IPM, Integrated Pest Management, before you go ahead and buy something to kill it, because culturally you can correct it. If you're just killing it with a pesticide, you're not correcting the problem. Next. So leaves, this is still me, I guess, yes. So you can use the mower to shred your leaves and then leave them in the lawn, on your lawn in the fall. We do this at Clark all the time. Leaves provide nutrients, helps prevent weeds. We mulch mow the leaves, we blow them all onto our lawn. Then we mulch mow it, and then we blow it back into beds, or if we can mulch it small enough, we can use it as on the lawn. You just leave it on the lawn. So you don't want to have big pieces of heavy matted leaves, because that will kill your grass. But if you're using a mulch mower, works great, and it just has so much nutrients in the leaves. Let's see questions. Let me just check on that. Does deep infrequent watering for lawns also apply to shrubs and ornamentals? Yes. Just different type of watering, but yes, I like to water my shrubs and ornamentals deeply and less often. And then again, is it important to integrate compost into the bare spots? That's great. You can use compost instead of any type of topsoil. I would rather use compost than purchase topsoil that I don't know where it's coming from, because the compost will work its way into the soil. The other topsoil, you'd have to sort of work it in yourself. So yes. Thank you for those questions. Weed control. So mulching is a great weed control. It always holds down all the weeds. Mechanical removal using a hoe, a rototiller, a cultivator. Physical removing by hand pulling, which again, I have my staff doing every minute of the day at Clark. Using plant diversity. That's sort of, when we're talking about turf, we're talking about different turf grasses. And then chemical control, which is a last resort. Follow all the directions carefully on any chemical that you're going to use, and make sure you're allowed to use them, and use the lowest toxicity, most selective, lowest residue, and organic if you could. Next. Insects and diseases. So many observed landscape problems are not caused by insects and diseases. Insects and diseases are opportunists. They come in after there's something that's stressing your plant, your grass. So eliminate other factors first and use cultural practices before you're running to purchase any kind of a pesticide for an insect. The insect is an opportunist and your disease is an opportunist. Just want to make sure everybody understands that. Next. So most diseases in turf is caused by fungus. It's a fungi. There are 25 different fungi that can damage your turf. Diseases only become noticeable when 3 to 5% of the turf is affected. And fungi attack turf plants because they're in a monoculture. So most of the time there's certain turf grass diseases, and you notice it, let's say in July. Well, that started in May. So it's too late. You can't treat it in July. The fungus is gone. It did its damage, and now you have to repair it in the fall. And that's the case most of the time. So just so you understand that's the result of the damage of the fungus that you're seeing usually in July. Okay, next. So pesticide application, and you can see on these pictures, having a rotary spreader or a drop spreader. In the first picture, no, you're getting the pesticide or whatever you're applying all over the place, going in our watershed, going down the drain. So issues, improper spreader use, timing of the application can be off. Is it raining? Is it going to rain? Is it going to water it in? You want to watch the weather. You want to know your soil type, and you're reading the bag of whatever you're using. And you want to make sure that the material that you're using is soluble. Next. Okay, do we have any questions?
I think you had answered the ones that were in there already on the Q&A, and then I don't see any more in the chat, but feel free if anyone has any questions for Bonnie. Again, if you think of something that you want to ask her during my future slides, you can always type them into, oh, there's something else in the chat thing now. Okay. Someone said, will there be time to talk about xeriscaping? We will talk a lot about native plants in the next part of the section, in the next section of the presentation. So it's not, I mean, it is xeriscaping, but I mean, usually they talk about xeriscaping when you're in more dry areas, but yeah, we will. So hold off on that and we'll get to it soon. Any other questions? No?
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be muted now.
And I am going to take over, and if I can get the thing to advance, I will continue the presentation. Okay, so now we're going to talk about saving water. So if you look at this infographic from WaterSense, it says as much as 50% of the water we use outdoors is wasted. And that can be from inefficient watering methods like evaporation, leaks in your sprinklers or in your hoses, sprinklers pointed at the wrong direction, water running off. So that's a lot of wasted water, especially during times like this when, you know, it's very dry and we might be over pumping our aquifer systems. So one thing we can do to help is to use something called soaker hoses or drip irrigation to water our plants instead of sprinklers that spray water in the air, and a lot of that water winds up on the sidewalk or winds up, you know, in the air and evaporates if it's very hot. So soaker hoses, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them, but look at the picture. They basically have little holes all running all throughout them. So they weep water, they drip water right down into the soil right next to the stems or trunks of plants, depending on what you're putting them on. And therefore the water is directed right to the roots where it's needed and it's not going to evaporate. Drip irrigation is a similar thing, except the holes are more evenly spaced. So basically like where this plant is, there'd be a hole, where this plant is, there'd be a hole. And it's more of a pipe. So it's usually like a plastic piping or a metal piping, and the soaker hose is more of like a rubber hose. So one drawback of the soaker hose is that it can't really be used for very long distances because then the water flow decreases along the length. So if you really have, you know, a really big area, a big garden that you want to run hoses like this, you might want to use the drip irrigation instead so that the pressure is more even throughout. But I have a soaker hose in my vegetable garden and it works fantastic. So another way you can save water is by using a rain barrel. Unfortunately, you need it to rain to use a rain barrel. So lately we haven't been having a lot of that. But when we do get those heavy rains, then it can soak a lot of that up and you can use it to water your plants. Basically, it is what it says it is. It's a barrel that is a container that collects rainwater. And you can see from this picture, most of the time you're collecting it from your roof. So your gutter downspout would kind of flow right into here. There'd be an opening here and the water would flow right into the barrel. And then you could attach a hose or use a watering can underneath to get the water out. Then you can use it to water your lawns or your gardens or anything that you want. It has the benefits of helping to reduce some stormwater pollution because it's capturing that water off your roof instead of it running off and going into the street and down the storm drain. It helps you save money on potable water to water your plants. It's better for the aquifer because you're reducing the stress on it. You're using just natural rainwater, and it's also really great for your plants. If anybody's ever noticed, after a really big rain, the plants look so much better. If you watered that much from a hose, usually they don't look as good as after a nice rain. And that's because the rainwater is said to be better for plants than tap water because it doesn't have chlorine, which can sometimes inhibit plants from taking in nutrients and reduce their growth. So rain barrel setup, there are many different types of rain barrels. You can make ones, you can purchase them. Usually the town sells one every year, but unfortunately this year we haven't been able to do that. But they all have the same basic things on them. So they have an opening with a screen. So the gutter down step out would be directed to the opening that has a screen. This prevents debris from getting in. It also prevents mosquitoes from getting in or other insects. It has an overflow valve, which is important. So you can a lot of times you can attach a hose to that and direct that somewhere. You don't want the water coming out of this because usually the screen part is next to the house. So you don't want it going into the foundation if it's going to overflow. It also needs some kind of spigot to drain. And most of the time you want to try to elevate your rain barrel because that helps to increase the pressure, when the water is coming out. So whether you're using a watering can or a hose, especially with the hose, you need higher pressure for it to come out faster. So one thing that's good to use with a rain barrel is a soaker hose because you don't need that much pressure since the water is just weeping out anyway. It's really a good thing that can be used with that. You also may need to cut your gutter downspout. So this person probably, I don't know what everyone's setup is at their house, but usually they come down and it goes down to the ground and then the water comes out on the ground. So if you have a rain barrel up here, you're probably going to need to cut up here so that it flows into the actual rain barrel up higher. And you can just put it to increase the height, put it on something like cinder blocks or bricks if you have them. We caution everybody, do not drink the rain barrel water. It should not be consumed by humans or by pets. Only use it to water your plants. We also caution everyone, so when water's coming from the rooftops, that your roofs may have been treated with chemicals. There also may be things like bird droppings on there, so there's bacteria. So we caution them about using them on vegetable gardens because of those reasons. You can use your best judgment of whether you'd like to use that water in a vegetable garden on edible crops. If you do decide to use it, we just say that you should make sure you water the roots of the plants and not really water the fruit or the leaves that you're going to eat. And then obviously make sure you're washing it thoroughly before eating. So another thing that you can do to help save water is when you have an automatic sprinkler system, use something called a soil moisture sensor or a rain sensor. And if you equip your automatic sprinkler with them, then you know that it's not going to water when it's raining, which obviously is very wasteful. And when the soil has enough moisture. So I actually think the soil moisture sensor is a better thing because sometimes, it can still water and it can go on when it's not raining, but maybe it rained a lot the day before and your soil really does have enough moisture, so it doesn't need to be watered. At least with the soil moisture sensor, it knows when the soil is dry and needs more water. There's also something called smart irrigation controllers. Some of you may have these already. They connect to the irrigation system and turn the system on and off, and a lot of them can monitor the weather and know when they should be watering or not. Also, the town is a partner with WaterSense, so look for WaterSense labeled irrigation controllers to help save water. They help save, I think, like 60% of water with their products than on standard products. So proper maintenance for your sprinkler system. So make sure each year you're doing this, probably would be a good idea before you put the sprinkler system on. So inspect sprinkler heads, make sure there's no leaks or one isn't broken, because a broken one can waste 25,000 gallons of water in 6 months, which is a lot. Make sure the pipes are connected. Leaks in pipes and hoses can waste 6,300 gallons of water per month. Make sure the spray is directed on landscapes, not the pavement. Obviously, that's a big waste of water. So those are all important things to do. And then obviously before the season is over, you can winterize by emptying the system of water and turning it off for the season. Make sure that nothing's going to freeze in there and crack any hosing or pipes. Another thing you can do to save water is mulching your plants and your garden beds. This helps to limit evaporation and also has an added benefit of suppressing weeds. And you can do a few inches, 2 to 3 inches on trees. This is bad. It's called volcano mulching. You do not want to mulch it where the mulch is touching the trunk of the tree like this. It causes a lot of moisture to be right up against the roots and the stem, and that leads to fungus and rot. So this is a lot better. You make a little kind of indentation around the trunk, and then you have mulch around it, but it's not right up against the trunk of the tree. And then for any kind of perennials or annuals, you can do a 1 to 2 inches of mulch. And there's many different types. Obviously, leaves are a good free one. You can choose whichever one that works best for you. So replacing lawn. So someone's asking about xeriscaping. So lawn is pretty water intensive. So this would not be a good thing to do if you're trying to xeriscape. What you should do is choose plants that are drought tolerant. And one of those types of plants are native plants. Native plants are those plants that have lived and evolved over hundreds of years or even thousands of years in a particular region. So for us here on Long Island, that would be ones that are adapted to our dry summers and other climate. We have a lot of storms, but we also have dry weather. They can handle the drought. And these are some interesting things that you can do instead of putting a lawn if you just want to do some kind of ground cover. There's Pennsylvania sedge, which kind of looks like a grass, and that's really good for shady areas. So if you really can't get the lawn to grow in the shade under a tree or something, this is a great thing. There's also something, wild strawberry. It's a native plant and you get the added benefit. I think it looks beautiful. You get these little white flowers, and then you can also get strawberries if squirrels and rabbits don't eat them all. And then this is actually in front of my house. This is this strip, I guess sometimes they call it a health strip, right next to the street. Not everybody has these, but we do here. And this is called creeping phlox. And this was an extremely beautiful flower showing in the early spring. There was just purple flowers, and for about 2 months they lasted, and they were really, really nice. Let me see, I saw somebody had a question. Can I add those around my roses? I'm not sure which ones you're talking about. The strawberry, maybe? If you want to type in. Let's see. Yes, the strawberry. Yeah, I would think that you can, it's a ground cover. They only grow like maybe not even 6 inches tall. So you can definitely add them around any kind of larger shrubs or trees. Okay. So this is actually my house, and I used to have lawn in the front, and I couldn't take having to water it. It's very dry. There's no shade or anything. So lots of sun. The lawn would always be dry and brown in the summer. And I didn't think that looked very attractive. And I also really care about wildlife. I wanted to attract pollinators like butterflies to my yard. So last year I took all the turf off and I replaced everything with native plants. And this season, everything's grown and filled out. There's some native grasses, there's butterfly weed, which is great for monarchs, and many other types of plants. And I think it may be a big endeavor for someone to do this, all at once. I really, this is what I really wanted to do, so I went for it. But You can also just, choose a small area of your lawn and replace it a little bit at a time if you want to. I still have lawn in my backyard because, people come over and their kids are playing in it, but in the front yard we don't really play, so I figured why not, make that a good haven for pollinators. And just, I think, to me, this looks more beautiful than just a green lawn. Oh, I have more questions. Let's see. Oh, just thanks. Okay. So let's move on, and we could talk more about native plants. So besides saving water, they have many other benefits. I'll talk about some more in detail, but you can just look at this graphic and you can see how much they do for our local area, because this is where they've evolved to live. So they're used to this area, and they have a lot more benefits than non-native plants do. And they're also beautiful, which we'll discuss. So one of the benefits is reducing stormwater runoff. So you can see in this picture all these different plants. A lot of them aren't native here, but I've kind of picked out the ones that are. So you can see the Indian grass, big blue stem, switchgrass, little blue stem. Some of these cone flowers are not native, but a lot of people plant them here, and they're kind of naturalized, which is fine, and they're not invasive. But they all have really long root systems, and this helps create space in the soil, and then water can go right in and can be filtered and go, and be absorbed instead of running off. And things like Kentucky bluegrass and other long grasses, you can see their roots are only a few inches. And while these ones have roots that are, I think this one goes down to 9 feet, 9-10 feet, things like that. So obviously they have a much bigger ability to absorb storm water than a grass would. So if you have a really big rainstorm, the grass will, and I'm talking about turf grass, it will absorb some of the water, but then eventually it's gonna run off because it's not gonna be able to absorb as much. While these ones will absorb a lot more, as well as other types of native plants. Native plants also require lower inputs. As I said, they're used to our soils, they're used to our climate, so they don't need fertilizer. Once they get established, they don't need watering. That picture I showed you of the front yard, I have not watered that once this year, and we've had a lot of very hot, dry time during this summer. And I planted it last year, it became established in the first year, and I have not watered it since then. They don't need mowing. So I haven't mowed that area, which has been great. And most are perennials. So, if you're planting annuals every year, they come back, the perennials. So these plants, they'll come back every year for you, and you don't have to worry about spending money on plants or planting new plants every year. You can also, have annuals as well if you want. If you like those types of plants, that's fine. You can have a mix of things, but these plants will come back for you. So then maybe you could just put a few types of annuals that you really like. And then a lot of them are pest resistant to native pests. So something like an invasive species, it probably won't be, but our native pests, usually it can handle some damage from them and still be fine. They're also beautiful. A lot of people, they think of native plants and they're like, well, they're probably not really as pretty as plants from Asia and Europe, but most of them are really beautiful. This is wild blue lupine, a really beautiful spring blooming plant. It also has, besides the beautiful flowers, it has really pretty foliage. Columbine is another nice, beautiful spring one with great flowers. It's also a hummingbird attractant. And common bearberry, a nice ground cover, which also has berries for pollinators. And this is what it looks like in the fall and winter. So they say it's semi-evergreen, but the leaves actually turn like a nice, beautiful red color in the fall and winter. And these are some other types of native plants. These are actually all from gardens around the town. This is purple coneflower with some cute skipper butterflies that I took a picture of. So obviously the wildlife are using it. As I said, purple coneflower, echinacea, is not actually native to Long Island, but it is a naturalized species and it provides great benefits. It's not invasive, so we like to use it a lot, and feel free to do so. Mountain laurel is really like, these flowers are amazing. I think they're so beautiful. Red chokeberry is great. It has pretty flowers as well as nice berries for wildlife. Garden phlox, which a lot of people may have planted and not even realize that it is a native plant. And the butterflies in my yard are going crazy for it at this time of year. Goldenrods, some of them might get a little aggressive, but they're really, really helpful plants in the fall. They bloom in the fall for butterflies, especially butterflies like monarchs that are migrating. So it helps fuel them in that time of year. This is called an anise hyssop, Agastache funiculum, and I love this plant. I have it all over my front yard and my backyard now, and butterflies and bees love it. So it's always buzzing with something in there. And blazing star is also a really, really pretty plant. It has very interesting spiky blooms, and it's really great for butterfly attractant as well. So these are some of the pollinator gardens we have in the town. If you've ever visited Clark Botanic Garden, this is the pollinator garden there, and you can see there's a lot of, this is a milkweed called common milkweed, which is a really great plant. I warn you about planting something like that because it's not invasive, but it's very aggressive. So if you have a big area and you want something to fill it up, that's a good plant for it. But if you have, an area that you don't want common milkweed to just keep popping up all over the place, then you should go with a plant called butterfly weed is a better milkweed, and I'll show you that in the next slide. So this is Ritter's Pond Park in New Hyde Park. This is a pollinator garden we planted this year, which is why it looks so small. So if you check that out, eventually it's going to start, everything's going to start blooming. You could actually see this is the butterfly weed I was talking about. It's small, but it has really pretty orange flowers right now. And that's going to start spreading out and looking more like a nice full garden like this soon. And then Gary Park, we planted a pollinator garden. We finished planting it last year. This was in the spring. This is actually probably late spring, early summer. This is the butterfly weed again. And these there's, I think, is yarrow, common yarrow, these beautiful white flowers. This is a goldenrod species called rough goldenrod. And you can see in this is actually going to be for an educational sign that we're going to put by the garden. So when people visit, they can, look at it and see what types of flowers are growing in there. So these are all the different types of native plants we have put in the garden at Gary Park. So unfortunately, there's construction going on there now, so you can't visit, but hopefully later in the fall, they'll be done and you can visit then. So another benefit of native plants, as I've kind of been saying this the whole time, but is for wildlife. Native plants have nectar, they have pollen, they have seeds, leaves, fruit. They feed birds, they feed butterflies, bees, other insects, as well as mammals. They also provide cover for wildlife to rest during bad weather and to hide from predators. They provide nesting materials for birds and insects and even mammals. And they provide host plants for butterflies. So I've talked a little bit about that with monarchs and milkweed, but host plants are basically the plant that the butterfly must lay their eggs on so that the caterpillars can eat. And most butterflies can have, one type of plant, like monarchs have to lay their eggs on milkweed so that their larvae eat that. And there's many species of milkweed, but it has to be milkweed. And then there's other butterflies that may have a few different types of plants. And then there's some that have a bunch of different types of plants that are their host plants. Native plants also help to reduce habitat fragmentation. So much of our environment has been fragmented due to human development. So if we can create areas with native habitat, with these native plants, that's what we're trying to do with, teaching everyone about these kinds of things. So people can put them in their own yards, help create habitat. People can put them in their businesses. We're putting them in our parks, and we can kind of connect that habitat for them so they don't have to go far to find another patch of native plants that they can use for all these different benefits. And this was at Gary Park. A little bumblebee was on. This was like right after we planted it. There was already bees there on goldenrod. It's called showy goldenrod. And this is a monarch eating winterberry berries. So winterberry is a nice plant as well. It's not evergreen, obviously. You can see that there's bare branches, but these beautiful berries are there in the winter and the birds love them. One thing that we are doing in the town is surveying for pollinators. This is part of something called the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey, which is run by the Natural Heritage Program. And it's aiming to determine the distribution of native pollinators and their conservation statuses, because a lot is unknown about native pollinators. And native pollinators include things like bees, which everybody knows, and butterflies, but they also include moths, they include flies, beetles, and even wasps. So they all of these insects provide, they also, hummingbirds are pollinators as well, but they are not part of the study because it's about insects only. But they all provide an essential role in pollinating a wide variety of flowering plants, including wildflowers, trees, garden plants, and cultivated crops, which I'm sure people, when they think of pollinators, they think of honeybees. Honeybees actually are not native pollinators. They are from Europe, and they are a cultivated species that we use to help pollinate our crops. And we love honeybees. They're great. They help us, give us so much food, but native pollinators are also very important. And a lot of times they are in more trouble than these cultivated species, because we just keep producing more, but nobody's doing that for native wild pollinators. So a lot of them have suffered population declines over the last few decades. If anybody's heard about the rusty patched bumblebee, it's now listed as an endangered species on the endangered species list. And that used to occur on Long Island, but I don't think there's been any records of them in a long time here. And then the monarch butterfly, most people know that there's been a decline in them as well. I'll talk a lot more about them in the next slide. So basically, when I survey for pollinators, I'm just taking pictures of them just to provide a record of what we have. And I'm doing that at Clark Botanic Garden. So once a week I go there. I've also started to do it at Gary Park now that we have a big pollinator garden there. And then I submit these photos to the project on something called iNaturalist. You guys can participate in the project too in your own yards. It's really cool. I'll have a link to it at the end of the presentation. So these are just these pictures on the slide are just some of the different things I found. I mean, if you look at this is a fly. It's called the transverse flower fly, but it looks like a bee. So it's mimicking a bee or a wasp so that it looks dangerous and, it won't be eaten by predators, but it really can't sting. It's harmless. As well as this is a fly too. It kind of looks like a fuzzy bumblebee, but it's a fly. So it's another bee mimic. This is a leafcutter bee. Leafcutter bees are really cool. They actually will cut little circles out of leaves and use them in their nests. So most bees are actually solitary bees. Again, most people think of bees as honeybees, so they think of them living in these big colonies. And most bees, about 90% of them are like this leafcutter bee, and they have their own nest, either it's underground or these ones actually will nest in stems of plants. And they're a single mom providing for their babies. And they're, bumblebees actually are colonial as well, but most bees are solitary like this. This is another one. This is a type of sweat bee. And sweat bees are called that because sometimes they can actually go on you and they'll drink the sweat off of you, which has never happened to me yet, but not all of them do it, but it's interesting that they're trying to get the minerals off of your skin. So if that ever happens to you, don't be afraid. This is another really cool moth. It's a lot of people think moths only fly at night, but there are many day flying moths, and this one is called the Nessus sphinx moth. And it's really beautiful. They flap really fast. They almost, these are called hawk moths or even hummingbird moths, and they kind of look like hummingbirds because when they fly, they flap their wings really fast and they dart around, so they kind of look like hummingbirds when they're feeding. Okay. So I said I was going to talk more about monarchs. Monarch butterflies have decreased in their population about 90% since 1990. That's mostly been due to habitat loss and pesticide use. Insecticides can kill them directly or harm them. And then herbicides kill their host plants, which are milkweeds. So a lot of times, maybe not us, but when people are clearing land for agriculture and for development, they're killing the milkweeds, which they need as their host plant for their larvae. And you can see in this graphic, the population of monarchs are counted each year in Mexico because that's where they overwinter. So they migrate from here to Mexico in the eastern population of monarchs. There's also a western population which live in California. But this population goes to Mexico, and they count them by the area that the monarchs are in, because they can't count each individual monarch. So it's in hectares of monarchs of the area. And you can see that in the early 90s, there was, a bigger population that's been steadily declining over the years. Last year, we actually had kind of a bump up. There were 6.95, I think it says. I'm sorry, I can't really, it's very tiny on my screen. So there was 6.6, around 6 hectares of monarchs. And then this year it went down quite a bit. So we have to keep helping to, provide that habitat for them. So the town has taken the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. It's by the National Wildlife Federation, and it's helped us to commit to taking actions to help monarchs and other pollinators, one including public outreach like this presentation, increasing monarch habitat, and participating in research in our parks. So as I discussed, we have multiple pollinator gardens around the towns with milkweed in them, as well as native nectar plants for monarchs and other pollinators. We registered the pollinator garden at Clark as a monarch way station. In the picture before of it, you could see the sign that said monarch way station. And it just means that garden contains all the necessary host plants for monarchs, as well as nectar plants and sustainable management practices like no using of insecticides or removing invasive plants so that the native plants can survive, and not using fertilizer, using mulch, things like that. And this year, I've also started to contribute to a research project called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. So this helps to determine the density of monarchs, and I'm doing it in Clark Botanic Gardens pollinator garden. So every week I'll count the number of eggs and larvae and submit the data to the project. It's a national project, and you can, again, it's a community science project, so anyone can participate if they wanted to, if they have milkweed at their house or a local park. If anybody, eventually we have milkweed at Gary Park, so if you wanted to monitor it there, that would be amazing. Then we'd have 2 town parks that were being monitored for it. And I have a link to the project at the end of the class so that people get more information. Other ways you can help pollinators. Again, plant native plants. Those are very helpful. They provide what they need to provide for, nutrition and nesting material and everything for native pollinators. Reduce or eliminate pesticides. Pesticides, I know people, when they think of pesticides, they think it's just insecticides, but pesticides really include all herbicides, all insecticides, fungicides, rodenticides, anything that kills a pest. So especially we'd like you to reduce or eliminate insecticides, as those can directly kill pollinators and other beneficial insects. If you see some damage on your plants from insects, it means that plants are using your habitat. So that's a good thing. So as long as they're not, it's not too severe where the plant is dying, allow the predatory insects to do the work. And a lot of native plants will attract these. So your lady beetles and your praying mantises, things like that, they're gonna help out on your property and eat all those bugs that are, like aphids and things like that that are trying to damage your plants. Again, as Bonnie was saying, if the damage is too severe, you can look for organic, low toxicity insecticides, and please use them selectively. Like, don't spray everywhere, just spray where it's needed. And just also be aware that a lot of people I've been hearing, and I see these signs and they scare me for like getting rid of mosquitoes in people's yards. But when they do that, they're spraying insecticides in your yard. So insecticides are going to kill other insects in your yard. So just be aware that spraying for mosquitoes could potentially harm and kill other really good insects like pollinators and predatory insects too, as well as harm birds, because if birds are eating, first of all, if there's no insects, then birds don't have them to eat, or if they're, they are eating insects that have, the insecticide on them, then they can be harmed as well. Also, if you do spray fungicides, there's been some research that's shown that fungicides in pollen can kill the larvae of bees. So one thing you can do if you do have to spray a fungicide is to spray it before or after a plant flowers, so that you're avoiding getting the fungicide in the pollen itself. You could also provide nesting areas for bees. They nest in hollow stems or in bare patches of ground. So providing these can be very helpful. So leaving a dead tree stump as well can provide nesting habitat for things like carpenter bees and other, if you put holes in it, you can provide for things like mason bees. One thing we ask everyone to do, if they can, is to not cut back perennial plant stems until the early spring instead of in the fall. And in the spring, leave them about 8 inches in height, and then the solitary bees can be able to nest in them in hollow stems. Really provides good nesting material for them. The last thing is to reduce outdoor lighting. So artificial light, especially at night, causes wildlife to change their normal behavior. The light interferes with migratory birds, amphibians, and insects. So you can get motion censored lights, which is a great thing to do. That way, they're not on all the time. You can get light fixtures that are called full cut off or fully shielded, which means that no light is visible from above. Or there's also different yellow bulbs. There's yellow LED bulbs, and then those are supposed to not attract as many insects because they don't see the light as well, which is very helpful too. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about stormwater capture. We already talked about rain barrels helping, native plants helping with their long root systems. So just quickly go over rain gardens. If anyone took Rusty's class a few weeks ago, that was really an in-depth discussion, but I'll just talk briefly about them. Rain gardens are shallow depressions in the landscape. They're used to capture stormwater, usually from a gutter downspout or a sloped area. You can see this picture that it's kind of a bowl shape so that the water can go in, and then you plant it with native plants so that they have these long root systems that can absorb that stormwater. Besides stormwater reduction, they can also filter stormwater, which is great. They help to put water back into our aquifers, so that helps recharge our groundwater. They provide wildlife habitat with the use of native plants. This picture is of the rain garden we have at Clark Botanic Garden. This was like right after planting, and we have this little path here of stones because they had water that came from this area, and there was a slope, so it was running down and pooling in this area. So now it goes into the rain garden. Another thing you can use is porous or permeable pavement. So things called pervious concrete and pervious asphalt, they look just like traditional materials, but they have the fine particles that are left out. So there's enough space for water to seep through. So you can see in this picture, they're spraying water and then the water is just going right through. So when there's stormwater runoff, it's not pooling on top, puddling or running off, it's going right through so that the water can seep into the ground. There's also permeable pavers, so something like this, interlocking pavers, this has stones in between so that the water can seep through. There's also ones with grass in between, and you can put plants in between, things like that. And if you are redoing a patio or a driveway, I encourage you to look into these options instead of just standard materials that the stormwater will run off of. So these are the resources. There's a lot of them, I know. So if you can, take a screenshot with your phone, I'll just briefly go over, this is our town sustainability page. On it, there's a town native plant list. So if you're trying to figure out what native plants that you can get for your yard, this is a list that has a lot of different choices for you. This has our pollinator survey observations from on iNaturalist, so you can look at those, and then you can also try to join the project yourself, and maybe look at the pollinators in your yard. There's also a native plant finder on National Wildlife Federation, which is helpful if you're looking to figure out which plants are best for you. The Xerces Society has a lot of great information on pollinators and also gardening for them. This is Mayor's Monarch Pledge, so you can get more of an idea on what the town is doing. The Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, if you'd like to participate. The Long Island Native Plant Initiative is great for information about native plants, and it's local information, so you can contact them or go to their website and get more information. And then if you'd like to purchase native plants, I have to say that none of these companies are endorsed by the town of North Hempstead, but these are some places that have native plants on Long Island. Long Island natives, they're kind of out on the islands in Eastport. They will sell to retail, so you just have to contact them, as well as Pinewood Perennials and Warren's Nursery. There's a woman, Vicky Bustamante, which you can contact, and she will sell to retail as well. You can also check places like Hicks and your local nurseries. If we want to increase native plants in local nurseries, then people should ask for them, and then hopefully they'll start carrying them more and it won't be so difficult to find. And then the Long Island Native Plant Initiative, or LINPI, is actually holding a fall plant sale September, which I spelled incorrectly, sorry for the typo, September 12th and 13th in the fall. So hopefully they'll have more information. This just came out a couple days ago, so I don't have any more information than that. So you can contact them for more details or go on their website, which is here. So that's it for me. I want to say thank you, but let's go back to this slide just so everyone can see it, and then I can see if there's any more questions. And Bonnie, feel free to chime in if you have any answers at all as well. Someone said Bayless Nursery in Port Washington carries native plants. That's great. Thank you very much, Kathy. I actually have gone there because it used to be by where my office was. So that's good to hear that they're carrying native plants, and it may be a lot more local than some of these other places. Does anybody have any other questions? We're pretty much at time, but I'll wait another minute or two just to see. While people may be typing, I just want to thank everyone very much for attending the class today. I hope that Bonnie and I have given you a lot of good information to go back and look at your yards and try to do things more sustainably, and maybe replace some lawn with some native plants or put them in your gardens. Thank you very much to Bonnie as well. Let's see, there's a question.
Thank you also.
Someone said we're going to share the presentation. I am recording it, so we should be able to share it on the website. I will, as soon as I can do that, I will probably email everyone that's registered and share the one we have from the native plants from a couple weeks ago. They actually put it on NHTV, so it's possible we might be able to put it on there as well.
And please come visit. If you want to see these plants before you purchase, please come visit Clark or any of the other sites that Megan was speaking about.
Yes, someone asked about my garden. Let me go back and I will see if I can tell you a little bit more about the plants in my own front yard. Oh, there it was. So as I said, I have butterfly weed here. Where'd my pointer go? Here. This yellow plant is Coreopsis verticillata. But there are many other Coreopsis that are just as nice. I have little blue stem grasses here. This is a serviceberry tree, a Melanchier. Over here are New York asters, I believe. They don't bloom until the fall, so that's why they're just kind of a plant right now. I will warn you though, rabbits love to eat them, so if you have a lot of rabbits, I've been having a lot of problems with them eating mine. And then back here is that anise hyssop, that purple flower that I really love because it attracts a lot of butterflies. I have the purple cone flower over here. There's blazing star, which again is loved by rabbits. So again, I've been having, it's supposed to be more in here. There's a couple of plants, but I just don't think it's blooming yet. Again, I have that creeping phlox, the Phlox subulata in the front part. So over here I have, in this strip, I have that plant. I have mountain mint, pycnanthemum. That's this white plant, which really does, it blooms for a long time and it attracts a lot of different pollinators. And along here, it's really difficult to see from this angle. I have New Jersey tea shrubs, which are, they're, not only are they a good pollinator shrub, but they also are a host plant for certain types of butterflies. I believe it's azures. And then there's goldenrod in here. Again, they're not blooming yet because it is not the fall, but they will provide nice blooms and yellow blooms in the fall. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think that's everything that's there. Was there any other questions? And thank you, Jennifer, for saying that it looks beautiful. So again, I hope everybody's inspired. The fall is coming up. So now is probably not the best time to plant because it's so hot, but end of August, early September, even into October, you can, start planting and putting some new things in. And also, again, if you want to participate in any of those projects, the pollinator survey or monarch monitoring, now is the time to do that before the pollinators go away. And just thank everybody again for coming. I'm very happy that people came on a Sunday morning, and I know the weather's not great out anyway. So, but thanks again. And I will be hopefully sending the presentation out in a few days. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.